Greetings all, this is Hairy Nick. We are back for another episode of the Hangar Bay, the weekly show where we talk about your submitted X-Wing lists. Now, over the past few weeks, we had a chat about the new factions, the Resistance and the First Order, now in the game of X-Wing thanks to Wave 2. But there was one more ship from that wave that we haven't spoken about yet, the Mining Guild TIE Fighter. The TIE Fighter that is now on the Scum faction. In fact, now all but one of the factions has a TIE Fighter. And for those of you who aren't aware, the Mining Guild TIEs was a collection of TIE Fighters that the Empire sold to the Mining Guild, and they were modified in some kind of way to make them fly better around asteroids. I'm not too sure on the details. I'm sure some of you lore nuts down in the comment section can explain that far better than I can. But essentially, what these are slightly worse TIE Fighters that have this baked-in ability notch stabilizers. While you move, you ignore asteroids, which gives them a very tangible bit of upside. In terms of costings, they are slightly more expensive than the Empire TIE Fighters. In fact, they're 1 point more exactly if we're looking at the equivalent Initiative 1. The Mining Guild Sentry is 1 more point than the Academy Pilot for the Empire, and the Mining Guild Surveyor is 1 more point than the Black Squadron Pilot, and both of those are the lowest cost ones that have a talent upgrade. So the cost of getting that baked-in ability is a strictly worse dial. The 5 forward has been turned red and they have lost the 4K, and they cost roughly 1 more point on average across all the different pilots to get that ability. I'm finding it very difficult to quantify the effects of being able to essentially fly through rocks. It seems like a really powerful ability. And indeed, having a look at the list that you guys have submitted, there seems to be a real interest in ways to exploit that. This ship right now is probably the best blocker in the game. Well, I guess that's a pretty hard call to make. We do have things like Initiative 1 TIE Strikers and Initiative 1 Quad Jumpers. And all of these things have their unique baked-in ability that really help with that, but being able to fly through rocks just seems like it gives it the right amount of flexibility in just the right amount of ways. Plus, don't forget, as a rules clarification, if you guys weren't aware, barrel rolling does count as moving, so you can move onto a rock and barrel roll off of it, or barrel roll over a rock, and all that kind of stuff. It all works. Just bear in mind this does specify movement, so you still can't attack while you're on a rock. But look, at the end of the day, if you're pulling off blocks and doing all that kind of stuff, I don't think losing your 2 red dice attack is really such a big deal. Also, in terms of the pilot abilities, this set of abilities is also very unique. In terms of comparing it to the other TIE Fighters out there, it's far closer to the Empire TIE Fighters than anything. Although the Empire TIE Fighters are really heavily synergistic when you fly the named pilots in a swarm, especially things like Inferno Squadron that all care about the same thing and stuff like that. But these guys make very good support ships, so they work well theoretically with each other and with other Scum ships. Probably not specifically as synergistic as a TIE Swarm on the Empire, but can play around with some of the dirty tactics that the Scum ships have. Also, 2 of these named pilots look like they function very well together, which we'll talk about in a tick when we have a look at these lists. But yeah, a very interesting ship. It's one of these things being added into the game which is possibly going to create an asteroid or rock meta, because this is something that specifically cares about asteroids. And indeed, in Wave 3, we're going to have another ship that specifically cares about asteroids in the Vulture Droid, because they can land on an asteroid and then move around in situ and act like a turret on an asteroid. Also in Wave 3, we're getting a new type of obstacle, which is this pink thing on the screen that you're seeing right now. I think it's some kind of ion cloud. We've got no details on this right now, but the fact that we're getting more ships that care about certain types of rocks and more different kinds of rocks to add into the game, it's very interesting. It's very interesting because although it's great that you can fly through rocks, in any one game you can only ever guarantee that you'll have 3, as in the 3 that you bring to the game. And that's something to think about, because the way we choose rocks and how we place them is about to become a lot more important. More on that later. Let's have a look at some of these submitted lists. And we're going to start off with a couple of patron submitted lists. This one, Dirty Deeds by Coda. And this is interesting because we have a lot of very known quantities here, specifically Forlom and Pale of Gordali. Also in this list, Tirani Calder on the Kimagila Fighter and Captain Siva in the Mining Guild TIE. Forlom has advanced sensors and Mist Hunter. Tirani Calder has expert handling, proton torpedoes and R3 Astromech. Captain Siva has trick shot, and Pale of Gordali has debris gambit 000 and engine upgrades. Now, I won't spend too much time talking about Forlom and Paylob. We've already mentioned them several times on the channel. We know that these are just ruthlessly efficient value engines that are just rocking the meta right now. What I'm more interested in is the combination of Tyranni, Coda, and Siva alongside Forlom and Paylob. I like this idea because this is an example of a kind of strategy that you can look at and say, well, maybe all the pieces aren't quite there yet. And something like the Mining Guild tie comes along and suddenly a list becomes very viable. Because you don't get an effect like Captain Siva's in a list for anything close to as cheap as he is. And Forlom and Paylob work well with Tyranni because Tyranni gives you an incentive for your opponent not to have green tokens. Captain Siva also plays around with that as well, so it's like we're reaching a critical mass of these effects, and we can actually build lists that pay off. Now, it is worth pointing out that it's a little bit awkward here because Captain Siva is Initiative 3, Tyranni Colder's Initiative 4, so Tyranni's always going to be shooting first. It would be ideal if Captain Siva could shoot first, and that way you can use his ability a bit more proactively. Good thing is, it still does shoot before Forlom and Paylob, so you can still combo off of that quite nicely. But it means you can't remove those green tokens for Tyranni to get the extra damage through. Don't think that's the end of the world, but it's an interaction that I would prefer. If there was like a way to change the initiative, you could think about swarm tactics. I don't love that idea. I think it's a little bit cute, but it's something you could think about nonetheless. But overall, it's quite cool. And at the end of the day, we have 4 pretty solid platforms flying alongside each other. I don't think we're sort of skimping in terms of power level or just raw health your opponent has to shoot through. It's kind of like the typical Forlom, Paylob, Boba list, and we're switching out Boba for Tyranni, Coda, and Captain Siva. Honestly, that feels okay. I think if you make this synergy work, that seems like a pretty solid strategy. The key here is locking down your opponent by removing their green tokens or stressing them out. Forlom and Paylob both have the jam action, so they can help you do that. If you manage to do that, Tyranni Cola can deliver a more fatal blow by hitting them. Captain Siva can also remove that token, and if you manage to lock your opponent down so they can't do this and sort of capitalize on that further by giving them stress from Forlom, you can really hamper the way your opponent flies. Just bear in mind that it is all specifically dumping on your opponent's green tokens, so if they have a list that doesn't care too much about green tokens, might not feel too good in the situation. I will point out that green tokens are pretty much always sought after. There's very few lists that don't care about them. But it is something to think about. Your opponent could just use other tactics and focus more on like arc dodging or positioning and that kind of stuff. And that could lead to some feel bads. But Coda looks really, really awesome. Please let me know if you have a go at flying it. And yeah, I want to hear how it goes because it's a really, really cool idea. I've got another submitted list from one of our patrons. This one is Sabine's Miners by Belgarath. With all of the named Mining Guild ties and Sabine Wren on the Lancer. Foreman Prouch has Marksmanship. Captain Siva and Ahab all have Trick Shot. Sabine Wren also Trick Shot, as well as Forlom and Contraband Cybernetics. And I've spoken about Trick Shot before when talking about this platform. In first edition for a while there, we had an archetype going around called the Crack Swarm, which was a lot of TIE fighters with the Crack Shot upgrade. And Crack Shot isn't quite as good as it was in first edition. And moving into second edition, thinking about like just a very cheap 1-point value card that can help with aggression, Trick Shot seems like a really good option, especially on a platform that does specifically want to fly around rocks. I find this idea very, very interesting. We could put it on a bunch of generics as well. These are all different options. But of course, the named pilots also have the talent slot as well, so that works quite well. Now, Foreman Prouch with Marksmanship. My gut says I just want to put Trick Shot on him as well, because there's a bit of an awkward interaction. I can see what's going on here. If you have something inside a bullseye arc, you can tractor it, and if you're getting things inside your bullseye arc, you can also do things like Predator or Marksmanship, as this list is doing. Just remember, if you're tractoring a ship, there's a good chance it won't be in your bullseye firing arc anymore after you do that, which is kind of annoying. Yeah, I know you could just move him forward or directly sideways if that's where your bullseye firing arc's facing. And you could keep Marksmanship triggering. Unfortunately, Marksmanship is already a relatively difficult card to abuse, and having an extra layer of difficulty, having a non-bow with your pilot ability doesn't feel very good. Yeah, in all seriousness, I think Trick Shot's great. Trick Shot to work with the times where you don't get bullseye firing arc. Hey, if you get both working together. There is also the bonus here that you could track your opponent behind a rock and then get an extra dice off trick shot. I think that's actually far more likely than triggering marksmanship, and that's why I think just go for the value card that's going to work more often. I think it's probably the better option, especially considering they're both filling the same role. They're both aggression cards. Sabine's kind of fun. Usually I like to see her with some kind of card that combos with her ability, which pretty much at this stage is just Perceptive Co-Pilot. We don't have things like Glitter Stim or anything else to really abuse those focus results. Now, I will say that we don't have dice modification as good as we did in first edition. So even if we don't have any way to abuse this, it's still okay, and Contraband Cybernetics can help you focus more often. Just bear in mind that you are going to have to use up your actions in order to move that arc, which could interact a little bit awkwardly. I do like Forlorn here. Just like in first edition, you can get the free activation and you can lock down one of your opponent's green tokens. That feels pretty decent. But yeah, I'm not really convinced overall with this build that the value or the synergy is really that high with Sabine, so you might want to consider other options. What I was talking about before, by the way, we have a combination with two of these pilots, Informant Prouch and Overseer Yushin. Foreman Prouch can gain a disarm token in order to give your opponent's ship a tractor token. A very, very powerful ability. And Overseer Yushin, as long as he or she, I'm not familiar with this character, is within range 1 of Foreman Prouch, they can use their charge token in order to get rid of that disarm token. In exchange for a stress token, that's still very, very powerful. It means Foreman Prouch can still get a shot off. And the strategy is entirely proactive. It is entirely controlled by the player. It doesn't require your opponent to sort of position themselves so that your abilities work. As long as Overseer Yushin is within range 1 of Foreman Prouch, which you can do as a player, it seems really, really solid. I will say in general, I think Overseer Yushin is fun with Foreman Prouch, and I think as a general rule, I really want to see this alongside other things that can make use out of it. Just so if one of these platforms gets destroyed, you still get value out of the other one. I think that's one of the downsides of flying these two alongside each other without any other kind of interaction elsewhere in the list. I'll mention that again later in these reviews. Let's move on to our next list. This one is Scum Swarm by philliparrigo. And this is another example of what I was talking about before. We have an archetype that might break through if the right components come together. And Cascala on the Fire Spray specifically cares about you having generic ships at range 0 of your opponent's ships. Well, now we can fly Mining Guild ties with Intimidation, and they can fly through rocks, so that seems pretty realistic. We have 4 Mining Guild Surveyors with Intimidation here, alongside Caf Scarlet with Trickshot, L337, Marauder, and Han Solo. Now, yes, L3, Marauder, Han Solo, yeah, blah, 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 all cool stuff. Not going to complain about anything there. It's really everything else that's going on here, which is pretty interesting. Trickshot already gives you the ability to fire through rocks, and specifically want to block, so they want to do it aggressively. It means that Trickshot and Caf Scarlet does have the potential to get more value out of it. And yeah, it is worth pointing out that if you get all of these things comboing together, you can potentially fire 6 red dice out the rear arc with Caf Scarlet, with Marauder for a reroll, and Han for a focus token. It's not very realistic, but the ceiling on this is very high. I will say you do have to be careful. This is very synergy driven, and the synergy is very much reliant on your TIE fighters bumping into your opponent's ships, which is going to lead to feel-bads when it doesn't pull off. Caf Scarlet loses her ability, and all of your TIE fighters get no value out of their talent, so you've got to be very careful with this. Having said that, this does come down to the pilot. So if you're very capable of flying your TIE fighters in a box formation, I love that you can fly these guys in a box formation and just not care about asteroids. That feels like it means formation is much easier to hold, which could have a lot of value. So even if your opponent's flying an ace, you can just sort of move this box towards them wherever they go. And this relates to what I was talking about back at the start of the video, where we're picking rocks, and if your opponent's using debris clouds and placing them very strategically so you can't do that, it means that the rock placement suddenly becomes really important. And Philip, if you're watching, for that reason, I would consider putting Woody Harrelson in this list, taking out L3 and just slipping him in. That could be very useful. It's trial and error, I think, here. These are not quantifiable things that we've known in the meta before, and I think it's a very exciting new design space for the game to head in. So if you want to take something like Woody Harrelson that can move around rocks at the start of the game, that might have a lot of power. I'm saying this with a lot of speculation. I don't personally know how this is going to work. But look, in terms of making certain cards work, it's very exciting that we have these cards that are suddenly seeing relevance. As well as Calf Scarlet as well. That could be very, very interesting. Now, I will say, in terms of Calf Scarlet, I think her ability is just a bit cute. I don't think it's the kind of ability that really works consistently enough for me to really care about it too much in terms of tournament play, but this looks like a really fun casual list to play around with, and I'd love to see this on a table. I'd love to see it do well. It's one of these things that you look at, and if you pull it off, you're just going to feel so good because you've gotten this really nuts sort of alternate win condition style list working for you, and that just seems like a lot of fun. Plus, it's a lot of guns on the table. It is still 5 ships. One of them has 3 red dice. We have a total of 22 health to shoot through, so it's no small task for your opponent. So at the very least, the fail case is you have a decent collection of platforms, and that's never a bad thing. Always worth thinking about with highly synergistic lists. Let's move on. We have the same platforms again. This is Guild Sentry by Dirty Troy. Boba Fett in the Fire Spray this time, alongside a couple of the named Mining Guild TIE Fighters, alongside a couple of Mining Guild Sentries. Boba Fett has Fearless Marauder and Han Solo, and we have Ahab and Captain Siva with Trick Shot. So, we have a Fearless Boba. Now, in case you guys haven't been watching the channel for very long, I love Fearless on Boba. In first edition, Fearlessness on Boba Fett was one of my favourite things to do. I will say, since then, I've become a bit more of a boring tournament spike. And yeah, Fearless is so much fun, but ultimately, if I'm looking at tournament consistency, I'm not looking past a Bree Gambit on Boba Fett. I think in terms of the value engine, in terms of making Boba Fett last into the late game, it is probably the more consistent card. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I know that's the boring answer. But Troy, if you're watching, have a lot of fun with Fearless. It's so much fun. Just be aware that doesn't work out the rear arc, and it's a little bit awkward on the Fire Spray now. But a really fun explosive card if you can get it working consistently. Also, we have a couple of nice aggressive options in Captain Siva and Ahab. I love Ahab, by the way. The flavour of him being the whale hunter, Captain Ahab, is just so much fun. And look, in terms of what we're seeing on the tables right now, I mean, I don't really know what Wave 2 is doing to the meta just yet. But if we are going to see a lot of things enter into the meta from Wave 2, we're looking at Upsilon class shuttles and Millennium Falcons very, very seriously. And Ahab doesn't mind that one little bit. If the Wave 1 stuff is still going to have a big impact on the meta, and I have no reason to believe it won't, we're still looking at Lambda class shuttles, fire sprays, red line. So Ahab, more often than not, is going to have a target relevant. And if nothing else, the fail case is you're flying against a bunch of small base ships, and he's still initiative match with Siva and still has trick shot. So I think the fail case for him is absolutely fine. I think in terms of tournaments consistency, having these platforms on the table is a lot of fun. And yes, I know the Calf Scarlet combo is really, really fun, but we know Boba Fett is just this absolute value-driven, brawling powerhouse. And I think given all that, if the Mining Guild TIE Fighter does prove to be as efficient as it needs to be to see meta play, this could be a lot of fun, and I seriously think that this could be a powerful list. Troy, thank you for submitting this. We have one final list here, and it's another bunch of scum stuff. This is Mining Security by Joshua Lee, with Ahab, Overseer Yushin, and Foreman Prouch, alongside Nadrusalak in the Z95 Headhunter, and Quinn Just in the M3A Interceptor. Ahab has Trick Shot, Foreman Prouch has Outmaneuver, Nadrusalak has Elusive, Homing Missiles, and Stealth Device, Quinn Just has Composure, Proton Torpedoes, and Shield Upgrades. And I want to talk about this because this is pretty much typical of the kind of scum stuff that we're seeing nowadays. A bit of fun, cute little interactions we have here. We have Yushin and Foreman Prouch. Also, Yushin works with Quinn Just, which is one of the other reasons I want to talk about this. Quinn Just here can reload, well, essentially reload, his Proton Torpedoes, and Overseer Yushin can make Quinn Just lose the Weapons Disable tokens, so Quinn can essentially reload and refire on the go without having to take a turn off, which is very, very powerful, if indeed that does all pull off. It's a bit of a cute interaction, but having said that, we have a fun interaction with that and with Foreman Prouch, so at least if you're sort of pushing for these synergies to work, you're probably going to get at least one of these working every game, and that's good. I'd have a think about the upgrades being taken here. Quinjast has Composure and Chill upgrade. Not two cards that I'm particularly excited by. Look, essentially, Josh, if you're watching, Composure is just training wheels for new players. And that's okay. Look, there's nothing wrong with that if you need a bit of help sort of learning how to avoid failure actions. That is a relevant thing to have at your local shops. But I seriously would consider dropping this off and learning to avoid that. Have a chat to the more experienced players and learn how to avoid not making your barrel rolls or target locks miss, because that is the two things that can cause Composure to trigger. Also, I will point out at this stage, at some point on the channel, I will talk about teaching you guys how to eyeball range and all that kind of stuff, so your barrel rolls and your target locks essentially never miss. It's another one of those videos which is going to come down the track when I actually get a proper space to work in. That's all coming very soon. Very excited about that. Also, Shield Upgrade is a card that I'm never really that excited about. It just essentially stalls out the game for a bit longer, prolongs the inevitable. I'm never honestly that keen about those kind of cards. Also, Elusive and Stealth Device and Adru Salark. He only has 2 agility, so I don't feel like we really get a lot of value out of those things. Apart from anything else, doesn't have a lot of red on his dial, so we don't get a lot of value out of Elusive. And Stealth Device is probably going to pop pretty quickly. Honestly, I would just focus more on trying to arc dodge than anything else. If you find he's getting hit a lot, Stealth Device is not going to be a very efficient answer to that. There are other ways to sort of abuse him. I'd look at something like Lone Wolf. If you're making the Drew work for you, it's just going to be better than Elusive. It's only 1 more point, and it's a really, really solid card. Also, Homing Missile, it's a decent answer to some aces out there, but it is very narrow in its application and not always that useful. I've flown it a couple of times, and I found the big issue with it against some of the aces that you really just want to do consistent damage against, like Splinter Fell and that kind of thing. They just have a habit of not taking the damage and just evading the attack, which feels so bad with this card. Just a few things to think about. Josh, if you're watching, just have a go with it. Find what cards are working for you, what cards aren't. I really like what you're doing with the TIE Fighters here. I just feel with the other 2 ships we could get a bit more value out of those upgrades. And I think there are some pretty strong options. If you were looking at like a Lone Wolf on the Drew, or with Quinjast, you can think about equipping upgrades that have charges on them. So we have yet another application for his ability. You could put Elusive on Quinjast, for example. Then you've got even more flexibility with Overseer Yushin's ability, and you get just a little bit more value out of all the cards here. Seems like an option worth exploring, and I like the idea. I like these 5 platforms together. I think it could be a lot of fun. And thank you so much for that submission, Josh. And if any of you guys want me to have a look at any of your lists, please, in the comment section down below, in a block of text, please copy in your list and the link to the list within your favorite squad builder, yet another squad builder 2.0 or whatever you use. And also, just in general, have you guys had much of a chance of getting to fly the Mining Guild TIE Fighters? How are you finding it? It's a very interesting object in the game. I don't think it really warps the Scum faction in any kind of way, but I'd love to hear your thoughts nonetheless. In the meantime, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Reddit. Please consider supporting my Patreon. Thank you so much to all of my existing patrons. We'll catch you guys in the next video.